Ferris wheel downhill thrill. The moment of truth was about to unfold. The long-awaited amusement park, the Narrated, was opening in the city. Its a prominent and all-taking attraction was the twin Ferris wheel, Heaven's Door, on the north side of the park, and Memento Mori, on the south side. An enormous crowd had gathered for the inaugural ceremony, and Henry was among them, waiting for the openings. In his 20s, Henry was a professional parkour practitioner whose search for thrilling experiences was relentless. Like the surge of adrenaline in his bloodstream, he got a ticket from the Memento Mori's maiden ride and was shortly standing near it, waiting for his capsule to arrive after what seemed to be a never-ending revolution. Unlike other people, it was the first time on a Ferris wheel. After boarding everybody, both of the wheels began their movement. The panoramic view of the city to the transparent capsule was breathtaking. Henry was alone in the capsule, so he could also flex his arms by doing pull-ups on a rod placing across the roof. It's so mesmerizing. I wish I could stay here forever, Henry thought to himself when he saw the city illuminated by yellow and white lights. The town looked like a Milky Way. Henry combed the amusement park, and his gaze fell upon a spot that was unkept and being prepared for some construction. He gauged at the spot's location. The empty side was an equal distance from both wheels. Henry thought maybe the area would extend the twin Ferris wheel's parameters in the future, but little did he know about the upcoming events that would overhaul his life. All was going smoothly until a sudden jerk brought the Ferris wheel to a halt. There was a commotion in the crowd, and people began to prowl. Henry was baffled by the mayhem, and it was not late when he realized the source of the concern. The empty spot, about which Henry was speculating earlier, blossomed with a blast showy and well-illuminated bizzle. The smoke emerged from the pit as if a dominant volcano was about to erupt. The ones who were walking to the top of the spot fell into it. Henry swiftly got up, tried to open a door, and was jolted back as the seat of the Ferris wheel saw him moving along the rails to the ground, towards the pit. He saw the Heaven's Door wheel slowly bend into the pit, tilting to the side. People inside the capsules were terrified, although the pit was well lit. No one could fathom its end. They were screaming, and nothing could survive such a fall. Heaven's Door submerged into the pit. Now, on its little side, the ones who were trying to escape the capsules were suddenly thrust towards the walls, knocking some of them unconscious. The ones laying on the capsule's doors fell into the abyss as the doors flung open. Others were struggling to get a firm grip on the iron bars placed inside. Henry's athletic body and parkouring skills came in handy as the Memento Mori disappeared inside the dark pit. His heart was pounding with fear, and he did not panic. He was in complete control of his nerves, something that was essential in his training discipline. The fear was necessary to keep his mind alert and sharp. The Heaven Door's wheel suddenly spun as if an unseen power rejuvenated its motors. This made the people sitting aside swung as if they were in a spinner. People were screaming and holding tight to the bars with all their might. Some of them had made a makeshift upsizing sharp with their belts. It was still unknown how this would end. Clearly, there was no ending to the pit. Momentum Mori was only a few meters apart from Heaven's Door. The twin wheels were now in a free falling. Henry was weightless and floating in the air. The pit's lights suddenly went off. It was pitch black dark, and the wheels started falling at a constant, slow speed. When the lights were switched on, both wheels had mysteriously interchanged their places. Heaven's Door on top and Momentum Mori on the bottom. No one could figure out how the wheels could have revolved in its axis or on the free falling. Henry was clinging to the bar, with his hands were getting fatigued, and he feared he would be ejected into the pit shortly. But his will to not give up prevailed. He summoned all his courage, and with the support of his legs, he pushed himself as the capsule's door opened, exposing the abyss below. "This is what I have to do for living. Is this all you got?" Henry smiled and talked to himself, as if he was waiting for this moment all his life. He pushed himself up and opened the roof door of the capsule, climbing on it, and secured himself with the railings. His standing, ovation-worthy stunt was akin to the one that happened in the movie Mission Impossible 2, when Tom Cruise is hanging off the cliff with his arms stretched wide and takes a backflip to save himself. When his memory conjured this scene, Henry had a moment of laughter in such a life-threatening scenario. Henry noticed a woman knocked unconscious in a jacked cabin, her head bleeding due to the impact of the fall. Her capsule's gate was about to open, and Henry was witnessing it all. What should I do? If I leave my capsule, I risk falling into the pit if the wheel begins to spin. The lady regained her consciousness, was attempting to get up, bewildered by what was happening. Henry was yelling at her not to get up, as it would disturb the mass distribution on the doors, and they would fling open like his. The woman paid little attention to his voice, because she was still in the trance. "Hey lady, don't get up! Get a hold of the bar near you!" Henry yelled at her, while waving his right hand and keeping his left hand's grip on the support of the capsule's roof. His capsule interior light had turned red, which meant it was going to be detached soon from the clamps. And Henry, as his captain was about to go down with the ship, the woman glanced at him with her eyes half closed. She tried to get up and discern what was happening around her. Henry knew she would not comprehend the situation easily, and he had to take a literal plunge onto faith. The lady was now standing on the glass door, which was about to break due to the many cracks. Her weight further undetermined the door's resilience. Henry jumped on a capsule and swiftly opened the capsule's roof door and rushed towards, but it was already too late. The glass beneath the lady broke and she fell through it. The Henry, agilely and godly movements would not let her slither away from his reach. Henry jumped after her, caught her hand, and quickly grabbed the door's handle. Now both of them were hanging in the air, holding to the feeble door handle that will break away any moment. "Please, don't worry, I got you. Now I'm going to hoist you up. You grab my belt and tie it up to the door's edge. Everything will be alright," Henry assured the lady, who was in another panic. Her heart was bursting out like a racing stallion. The woman closed her eyes when she gazed down the endless abyss and would not let go of Henry's hand. She had no other option, or else both would end up at the bottom of the pit, with their bodies plastered to the floor. She tried her best and scaled Henry's body. Climbing back to the capsule, she successfully tied the belt to the capsule's door and pulled Henry up. As soon as Henry was in the capsule, the pit went pitch black again. The Ferris wheel fall suddenly came to a stop, and now the capsule was again in an upright position, which made Henry and the lady fall to the floor with a thud. This time, Henry hit his head painfully and feared he must have attained a minor fracture. Henry was dizzy for a while, but regained his senses quickly. "What happened?" Henry inquired in disarray from a lady that was now holding his hand. "I don't know. The Ferris wheel started to move up," the lady replied in a hasty voice, her face covered in blood from previous injury. The twin Ferris wheel were now going upward with a steady movement. Henry and his partner were holding onto the rod, a firm grip in case it started to spin. There were only a few screams left as most of the people had disappeared from their capsules, as the ruthless pit had claimed their lives. The rest was engulfed with fear and clung to the seats like a leash to a body. At the time, the capsule movement was linear, and nothing bizarre happened. Suddenly the door remnants closed again, giving them an unstable sense of security. In the pit's bleak darkness, Henry spotted a few stars through the opening above, and this was his ray of hope. "Look! It's the sky! We're going back to the surface!" gasped the lady. The woman got up in an excitement, while Henry feared she would fall in the pit if the wheel started a downward movement with a jolt. He was sitting on the floor and signaled her with his hand to sit down in a faint voice. The capsule gradually approached the brim of the pit. Henry got up and jumped out of the capsule with the lady. He also helped the other people get out of their capsules, whose door was stuck. Surprisingly, the Ferris wheel did not emerge inside the park, but at a distance from it. It was bewildering to think about what just happened. In the distance, Henry watched police vans gathering at the amusement park, along with paramedics and abseiling team. It's a nightmare. Or I'm delusional. This cannot be real. It has no pragmatic explanation for its functionality. Henry murmured to the lady, who was putting a scarf on her wound to stop the bleeding. Soon, the police vans patrolling the park's perimeters spotted the crowd that emerged from the Ferris wheel. Ambulance and police cars arrived at the scene, taking the injured to the hospital while interrogating the ones in their senses. It was never clear what had happened, and no one had unfolded the mystery behind the amusement park.
Some quick background leading up to the night in question. I'm graduating from a university tomorrow, so I was determined to get an early night. I got around to my friend's house for a wee spliff, but don't get me wrong, I'm not a pothead. It was more of a celebration anyway. I remembered I had to take my mum to the hospital. Nothing serious, but she had to be taken and picked up. Then I remembered we rolled the joint in the car. Disaster, she's smelling seed everywhere. So I made a mental note to stop and vacuum the car. We have a 24-hour petrol station really close to us, but it's sort of on its own as there is no houses or buildings around. I pulled in and looked over to the shop. They use a hatch after 12 and don't allow you inside. But I didn't need anything. It had just ticked over 4 a.m. and I had to be up at 10. So I wanted to just get this done and get out of here. The vacuum machine was behind the coal shed, but it was very well lit. I cranked on some music on my phone and got to work. £1 for 4 minutes of vacuuming, not bad, I thought. No one else was in the parking lot except for one white van, but the guy inside was yelling wildly into his phone. Not loudly, just making a lot of gestures. I felt for him, probably some guy who's been driving all night, but hey, I cranked on with the work at hand. Then I looked over again and caught his eye. He looked away and I laughed. Love at first sight, I thought to myself. I was in an amazing mood. Then it started to get weird. The summer sun was already starting to rise, and the streetlights went out, including those illuminating the petrol station. It wasn't that dark, but it was noticeably creepier, and I was keen to really get a move on. I stared over at the van and saw the man watching me again, still talking on his phone. But then something happened that I really freaked out at. I saw someone lean forward from the other seat and peek around the guy, then immediately slam themselves back against the seat. That's when I noticed the guy on the phone was the passenger and wasn't driving. I hadn't noticed this when I drove in, but I shrugged it off and set the vacuum cleaner back, ready to leave. I threw all my stuff back into my car and went to unlock the door when a voice said, "Excuse me." I swear I nearly shot myself there and then. My heart was absolutely pounding, but I recognized the voice. The petrol station was a Spar, the same chain of stores I work in, and the guy who'd spoken was my old supervisor. He'd moved to the 24-hour store not too long ago. He began to shout at me for using the vacuum so late at night. The two guys in the van just sat there watching us as if waiting for him to go away. Then he said something to me that made my whole situation real. "I'm going to have to ask you to come inside. We aren't allowed to allow customers in past 11, even in a store that is open until 12. This is a big no-no, especially as I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong." I allowed him to lead the way, and the moment we were in the store he put down the shutters. He told me that he'd been watching the guys in the van, and they'd been sitting there for nearly 3 hours. Little did I know my old supervisor saw someone get out of the back of the van, and as he described it, put a bit of masking tape across a few digits in the number plate, effectively creating a new one. I began to panic. Looking outside, I noticed the van was gone. After checking the CCTV, it was shown that they sped away the minute I was taken into the store. We called the police and they examined the little footage there was. Immediately they took the tape and thanked us for bringing it to their attention. At one moment on the CCTV, the guy who got out of the back of the van turned to get back in, and it looked like he had a knife in his hand. I realized the sound's dramatic, and the story isn't exactly thrilling, but I cannot imagine what would have happened if my old supervisor hadn't been looking out for me. I'm never vacuuming at 4 a.m. anymore, that's for sure.
The Stench of the World by H.G. Gravy. My stomach recoils when I recall the squelch my mother's head made when it smashed against the pavement. Everything else is a blur, except for my father yelling for me to call an ambulance, and my mother's golden blonde hair dyed crimson in the pool of blood beneath her. At the hospital, the doctors gave us good news. It was only a minor concussion. A miracle, if you ask me. They said not to worry unless she started vomiting or slurring her speech. We should have known better. No one slams their head against concrete without suffering any long-term problems. Mom started acting differently. She complained of fetid odors with no source. Her attention was always focused elsewhere, as if listening to a voice that no one else could hear. We blamed it on the head injury and figured the side effects would go away with time. They didn't. Mom only grew worse. She continuously sprayed air fresheners and perfume all over the house. Every room had potpourri. 3 different inspectors checked the house and found nothing to cause an offensive odor. Mom's despair with the situation was only matched by her fury. Mom wouldn't accept it. For the next 3 days, she crawled through the house, sniffing at everything in an attempt to prove everyone wrong. She whispered unintelligible words as she went along with her nose to the floors and carpet. Dad and I begged her to get examined by a neurologist, as the fall must have impacted her olfactory system. Mom refused, enraged with us for doubting her claims. We left it alone as she wasn't hurting anyone, and frankly, we were scared of her. Leaving her alone was the worst mistake we made. My mother killed herself. I came home from school and found her standing atop the branch of an oak tree with a noose tied around her neck. As I approached and tried to stop her, she cried her last words to me in a voice which tethered between terror and insanity. "The smell. I figured it out. It's the earth, the sky, everything, everyone. It's rotting us all. Our future is forsaken. Now ends the reign of mankind." There wasn't a chance at saving her. As she jumped, the rope snapped her neck. There was nothing I could do but watch in impotence. My mind once again went into a familiar state of disassociation. It was Mom's accident all over again. Everything became a blur. Calling on emergency services, it felt as if someone else was speaking with my voice. Calling Dad, I was a million miles away in the cold void of detachment. I came back to reality when Dad shook me from my stupor. He hugged me tightly and tried to shield me from the sight of the men removing my mother from the tree. Then, the earth beneath our feet trembled and knocked us down. The seismic tremor was followed by an unnaturally strong breeze. It reeked of rot from an ancient abscess and a concentrated musk of putrefied fish. The silhouette of a behemoth rose in the sky, and its howl ruptured my eardrums. It sickened my stomach and forced me to vomit. Dad and the paramedics fell to their knees as it began to rain thick, pale maggots from the sky. In the last moments where my thoughts were mine, and mine alone, my mother's last words came to me as if she whispered them. "Our future is forsaken. Now ends the reign of mankind." I said the words aloud. I heard my father and the other men around us chant them with me in unison. We chanted those words over and over again, losing the last remnants of our spirits and souls until we were no longer individuals, but something resembling a collective of primal, antediluvian organisms held together by a single, all-consuming, overwhelming, and super-terrestrial being. Our future is forsaken. Now ends the reign of mankind.
I'm writing from the year 2224. The subject, VR gaming. It's become so advanced, and the realism deadly. Heed my warnings. Please learn from the past's mistakes. Here's my experience. I was excited to finally receive my pre-order of Syncore's headset console, upgraded with new technology, the Quartz Crystal Disk Drive, or QCDD, and the fantasy VRPG game Dragon's Castle. Despite being new technology with several reported bugs, the QCDD was desirable due to intense immersion within the game. So much so that players were being traumatized, claiming to have seen the devil face to face. Must be a terrorizing boss level, I thought to myself. I soon would learn just how riveting this experience was about to become. I arrived at my apartment building and unlocked my door via retinal scan, an agitating experience I've never gotten used to. I wasted no time and got straight to setting up the equipment and charging the devices. I pulled the QCDD delicately from its packaging, mesmerized by the glistening light that reflected off of it. I felt incredibly privileged. Gaming always felt like home. I put on my VR gloves and goggles and was greeted by a series of message windows. QCDD SynDrive VR console, copyright 2224. System 100% charged. Dragon's Castle game disc successfully installed. Press enter to play. I pressed the play button that hovered before me and was immediately immersed into the world of Dragon's Castle. Fluffy clouds, lush landscape, and before me stood a grand castle. Whoa, I said out loud. My train of thought was abruptly broken by the sound of electronic screeching. I screamed as I fell to the ground and clasped my ears. It was debilitating. When the noise stopped and calmness returned, I took a moment to gather my thoughts and cautiously rose back onto my feet. This must have been an error within the game. Perhaps that was one of those bugs that needs to be worked out. Nothing I can't handle, I reassured myself. Another pop-up message appeared. Enter player name. Racking my brain, I reflected upon a woman I had dreamed about many times, thinking she must have been my guardian angel. My decision was made. I input the name Sophia Halvard and press enter. Next, I developed my avatar. Warrior-like, yet beautiful, just as she was in my dreams. I gave her short, dark chestnut-colored hair, glowing green eyes, and the silhouette of a goddess. Her face, soft and delicate, but her body was built firm and strong, ready for combat. I saved my character and pressed enter. Now, point of no return had come.
Avatar creation complete,
A voice said enthusiastically. I looked down at my hands and saw my reflection in the shiny surface of my armor. My body was now in full feminine form and prepared for adventure.
My face! I'm her! I
stammered, stopping at the realization that even my voice had changed.
I'm Sophia!
I exclaimed with excitement. I held my beginner-level weapon firmly in my hands, a broadsword, and was ready to start my journey, despite my limited inventory. Over the course of the next month, I spent my weekends engulfed in the game, connecting with players and leveling up. I did encounter more minor glitches along the way, but nothing too serious. My main concern was another player who seemed to be following me. It's common that players mimic their rivals to gain traction, but this particular player refused to correspond. He was always alone and ignored every message I sent. A VR stalker? The laughable thought entered my mind. It wasn't until I was confronted by him and ultimately attacked within the game that I started questioning his motives. Over the next week, I also noticed other players beginning to show damage. Some left the game entirely. Others' avatars seemed almost frozen from the last spot I corresponded with them, and they weren't responsive to my messages. What was going on here? I finally entered a boss level, but before I could even prepare, I was ambushed. It was him again. He was attacking me at full force. I paused rather quickly and shot him another message asking him what his problem was. There was no response. Instead, the game started again, and we were right back to him pummeling me with punches and kicks. A warped screeching sound engulfed the room, and static filled the air. The room's pixels morphed into half game, half my apartment. I couldn't pause again, no matter how desperately I tried.
What the hell is happening?
I yelled. At that moment, my opponent threw another kick, and that sensation was so lifelike that I felt it within my chest. He began choking me, and I fought for air. Was this all really happening to me? Had I somehow actually entered the game? He reached for his weapon and was about to strike me with it when suddenly a bright gleam of light flooded all around us, causing my nemesis to drop his weapon as he was blinded. When the light subsided, I was in a completely different room. The walls glistened with crystals, and a beautiful figure stood before me, adorned in white. She resembled an older Sophia. She spoke to me in a melodic voice.
My dear family, you are in grave danger. You see, my name is Sophia, and I'm your ancestor. I was murdered by my co-worker. Once he discovered just how powerful the QCDD technology could be, I developed it to allow the transport of players between worlds, including the spirit realm. My co-worker killed me in order to preserve this vital information, keeping it confidential only to be used by himself. He kills off opponents when the game melds with your real world. Only then can he truly kill others. Their souls used to make deals with demonic forces. His desire is success in your world. My soul is trapped within this game. And I interjected once I realized that you are a part of me.
You're the woman from my dreams?
I inquired.
Yes, I was killed before he received the coding in its entirety. Hence, the many glitches the company can't seem to troubleshoot. This allows me to manipulate gameplay as best I can. Regardless, his warpath continues. Many of your fellow players have already had their fate sealed by him. His need for power grows stronger every day. You must defeat him.
She begged.
But I
stuttered, but before I could answer, I was transported back to the previous room face to face with the boss. I tried desperately to exit the game with no luck. I was stuck within the game. I realized I had no other choice. I used the boss battle as an opportunity to gain experience, as I knew the fight for my life was on the horizon. A rumble vibrated beneath my feet, and yet another piercing screech occurred. I was engulfed by blackness and smoldering earth. Menacing laughter traveled around me, although I couldn't see anyone. Tapping of what sounded like hooves on stone reverberated around me.
You are in the midst of pure darkness and evil, young warrior.
A devilish voice spoke to me.
I aim to gain your soul after you lose this battle.
He resounded.
And what if I win?
I asked boldly.
We shall see, brave one. Now fight!
He declared. With that, fire surrounded me, and my nemesis appeared before my eyes. I drew my sword as he chose his mallet weapon. The fire around us forced a tight battle zone. He managed to strike me with a few consecutive heavy blows. I tried to get to my feet, but the blood from my head wound blinded my eyes. He struck me again. My spine cracked slightly as I yelped. The pain and panic was so very real and agonizing. Was this the end? Was my soul to be another victim of demonic evil? I suddenly felt static all around me, and I turned to see my opponent traveling in slow motion. Everything had slowed, except for myself, and I heard her voice.
Be brave, warrior. I'm here with you. Find his weakness,
she said. I sprang up, and time resumed at normal speeds. I dodged his hits, and managed to injure him slightly with my sword. I thought to myself, I already know his weakness. His desire for power makes him overzealous. With that, I threw down any weapons and other inventory I had gained throughout my journey. Gems, health kits, runes, and magic potions. I had a mass of desirable luxuries that he would want for future killings. He wouldn't be able to resist. However, I couldn't have predicted what happened next. He reached out towards an emerald rune. The second he touched it, his entire avatar burst into flames. The shrilling screams that escaped his body were deafening. He fell to his knees, and I watched in horror as his armor turned into a fiery red from the heat of the flames. The flesh on his face began to melt away, exposing tissue and bone, with blood dripping to the ground in heaps. His screams became less and less distinguishable. Then, he suddenly collapsed, and his remains smoldered into a pile of ashes and metal.
Clever young warrior,
The voice from the shadows chimed in.
I had one condition for your opponent. Bring me souls in exchange for all the riches and desires of the world. But it had to be done through battle alone. Otherwise, his soul would be mine. He mustn't take without killing. You found the thing that ultimately broke him. His greed.
The voice explained. As I sat exhausted, I saw a vision of Sophia in my mind's eye. She thanked me, and I watched as her soul was released from within the game. All the souls that were used as pawns followed her. The demon of the shadows simply vanished. The fire around me extinguished, and I was transported back to the entrance of the castle. The game had started over. I successfully exited as quickly as I could. A few days later, I learned that one of the founders of Syncore had died in a house fire, and the company was being sued by families who claimed Dragon's Castle had somehow caused their loved ones' deaths. Some jumped from buildings, others seemed to have stabbed themselves mid-game. Of course, I knew the truth. And so, if you're reading this from somewhere in the future, I beg you to understand the power of advanced virtual reality. Be delicate with it, and never make deals with demons. Somewhere in the shadows, the founders of Syncore all gather to discuss tactics for the upcoming lawsuits. The CEO's successor speaks up confidently.
Don't worry, gentlemen. Our Dark Lord has everything under control. Us making the deal and being the original testers of this product did come with some benefits after all.
The executives laughed as they continued to make further offerings to the shrine of Satan.
The dripping woke him from his afternoon nap. What the hell was that? He said to himself as he rose from the couch. Following the faint tappings of the drips, he walked throughout his home, the sounds becoming louder and louder the closer he came to its source. Eventually, he came to his bathroom, to which the door was closed. He began to panic as he'd never closed it, and for the last 20 years, he has lived in isolation. Slowly and quietly, he placed his ear to the door, holding his breath so that he might be able to hear better. There was no sound other than the dripping, and various theories began to enter his mind. Perhaps he didn't turn the water off all the way the last time he washed his hands. Maybe he woke up in the middle of his nap to use the bathroom and simply forgot that he absent-mindedly closed the door when he was finished. He was getting old after all. Perhaps his mind wasn't what it used to be. Cautiously, he placed his hand to the doorknob and slowly turned it. The slow and loud creak of the door was agonizing, to the point where he decided to simply push it open. There, behind the door, was nothing. Nothing but an empty bathroom, with no leaking water and not even a sound. Not anymore. Confused, he turned around, scratching his head as he walked back to his couch. That was odd, he said to himself as he sat on the cushion and rubbed his eyes with his arthritic fingers. Maybe I am just getting too old, he sighed. As he removed his fingers from his eyes, his heart nearly stopped at the sight of something straight out of his nightmares. She looked exactly the same as she did the last time he saw her. Well, almost exactly. Her long blonde hair was dripping wet, as though she just emerged from the ocean. Her once tanned skin was now pale as a corpse, and her once green eyes, that he would stare into every night, were as black as the slime that was now oozing from her mouth. He tried to scream as loud as he could, but nothing would come out, and he closed his eyes, waiting to be taken by the specter before him. But nothing happened. Opening one eye, he saw that there was no one there. He opened the other, rubbed them both some more, and looked again. Did he just see the undead visage of the woman he once loved? Had she come back to haunt him, or was his aging mind really playing tricks on him? The rest of the day went on as usual, and no more did he see any terrifying visions from a long-dead infatuation. Later that night, however, his nightmares would once again manifest. It was a little after midnight when he opened his eyes, and to his horror, he could not move, not even a finger. His heart began to race as panic struck him. But he would not know true terror, however, until he realized the intense pressure on his chest was there for a reason. He could feel cold, wet hands grab him by the head and lift it slightly. There in front of him, sitting on his chest, was her. Her deep black eyes stared into his eyes, and she slowly opened her mouth. She pulled his head closer to hers and placed her cold, soggy lips to his own. He could do nothing but moan and gargle as he could feel and taste cold, rancid water being purged down his throat. Black liquid seeped from their lips as his eyes rolled into the back of his head. Eventually, his moans and gargles ceased as he was released. He would never awaken. It would be weeks before his corpse would be found. Only when his daughter, who had become worried after hearing nothing from him, notified the police for a welfare check, would he finally be found. He laid there, a look of horror frozen on his face, but no traces of any water or any indications that he had been drowned by the undead spirit of a woman he had loved for years. Eventually, however, a horrifying truth would be unearthed as his home was investigated. In his basement, locked away from the rest of the world, was a large drum. Inside that drum, which had been filled with water, were the remains of a woman that had been reported missing more than 20 years ago. Her official cause of death was that of drowning.
I still had blood in my veins yesterday. At least, I'm certain something thrummed through my ears as I tossed and turned on my pillow. Why can't it ever just be mild outside? Why must the weather oscillate between extreme cold and heat? I kicked my sheet off, trading a fraction of a degree for phantom vulnerability. If I stayed as still as possible and pretended to be asleep, maybe my mind would drift off for real. Perhaps I'd rested too much during the day. When the rain let up, I got my hammock out of storage and lazed under some apple trees. Petals from spent blossoms fluttered down onto the neglected pages of my book. Coupled with raindrops spotting the paper, it might have looked like I was weeping into some sad story. But far from it, I was quite at peace. The book and I were open to whatever the heavens saw fit to rain down on us, just enjoying being outside, smiling softly, swaying in the sunlight. Like the rudest possible guest, the warmth overstayed its welcome, invited its friends, and stayed the night. I was laying motionless on my side when I heard a close, crunching noise. Very close. Within my ear. I rocked my head gently, pivoting on my ear, trying to replicate the sound. It was not unlike what you hear if you use a Q-tip or some such, and I thought it was some sort of upstart hair jutting out to say hello. Regardless of how I angled my head, I only heard it if I was flat with the pillow and still for a time. The crunchy rumble creaked on, as if moving towards the opening of my ear. Taking care not to disturb my neck, I brought my hand up to my face and quickly hooked my index finger around my ear, pinching the canal closed. Obviously, I heard the obstruction this caused, but beyond that, deeper into my head, I heard the curious rumble again. My eyes shot open in a panic, not because I pushed back some wad of earwax falling out of my head, but because whatever it was seemed to react to my intrusion. I could explain the initial movement easily enough, but it was the delayed noises that made my stomach lurch. A sensation I was certain was something correcting itself and skittering back into the depths of my skull. Between the fear and the mirror, I accomplished nothing with my tweezers besides scratching the inside of my ear raw. That whole side of my head itched. I scratched at my scalp, eyes and nose. Many hours and allergy pills later, I drifted off to a fitful sleep. I woke up today scratching the back of my right hand. The first layers of skin were already torn at the base of my index finger. I went through the motions of getting ready for work, but that quickly gave way to searching for something to soothe the itch. I tore through the house for an abrasive surface, anything that would assuage my hand. I tried exposed bricks, sandpaper, even that tiny side of the cheese grater no one uses. At last, I held it under scalding water. I felt nothing but the searing itch beneath my blistering flesh. The boiled skin ripped open from my now constant scratching, a small tear through which I could see the glistening red within. There was no blood, no pain. I dug my fingernail into the tear and worked the wound open. It was bizarre to peel the skin back and feel nothing apart from the psychological distress of my mind bellowing at me to stop. The first thing that struck me was how dry everything was. The last bastions of moisture seemed to be held up in thin veins of yellow mucus, twisting around the muscles. Through the window I had opened into myself, I spied something white, peeking between the red of parched tissue. Running parallel to the tendon of my index finger, the source of the infernal itch nestled between my muscle tissue like a forgotten bookmark. I gingerly pinched the edge of it. It felt like wax and paper, threatening to split apart if I pulled too fast. I had grasped it in the middle, and I could feel each end come away, and as it slid out, the burning itch left with it. Relief was instantaneous. I closed my eyes to savor the moment's relief. I held some sort of flatworm, around 4 inches long. Its body was paper thin, composed of oval segments. In the center of each segment, a small black sphere sat fixed in place by a tightly drawn layer of the white flesh comprising the rest of its body. I abandoned my study of the thing when the itching sensation flared up again. With the parasite removed, more tertiary aches came to the forefront. One was further along the same hand. I rooted a finger into the loose flesh and looked inside. I saw pale skin dotted with evenly spaced black spots wrapped around the knuckle of my pinky finger. I coaxed it off the muscle and bone and once again felt elation. The bliss was as perverse as it was brief. I stared in terror at my ruined, ghoulish hand. I thought of how I could possibly fix this, of the sheer wrongness that this unfeeling, dead limb was a part of me, had ever been a part of me. Like stars in the evening sky, itchy pinpoints blossomed across my body. I could imagine, based on where the itching was and how it felt, what the position the worms would be in. I could feel one wrapped around the base of my left big toe, one in a bunch below my right knee, one laying long and thin around the rim of my nostril, ending at the tip of my nose. There is no feeling left, only itching and relief when I cut one out. That I haven't gone into shock from the large portions I've excised from myself is a testament to that fact. I only hope I run out of them before I run out of me.
Thank you all so much for listening to tonight's story. Now I'd like to take a moment to thank all of my Patreons who helped make this channel possible. Thank you, Breaker19, for all your help and support. You guys are amazing.